Hi, Lauren. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. This is a great topic to jump into with the fun heat wave we're having here in Los Angeles. I think this is unfortunately a perfect segue for today.
Perfect.
To kind of start off the conversation, I'd love to hear how you got involved. Obviously, we've known each other for a while, so you've worked in a number of different verticals and things. Would love to hear kind of how you got involved with Firefly.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I was doing various consulting for larger CPG firms and some small startups as well. And my boyfriend was involved in the business and would talk to me about it. And at the time, they were really primarily focused on just straight direct sales to business, like D2B, to teams. And as they were looking to roll out their consumer side, we were just brainstorming. And he said, I really want you to come talk with my founder and just maybe do some work with us. So it started out pretty casual as a consulting type thing. And as the businesses evolved and they, needed more and more marketing support, I eventually joined full time.
And I think what's, in kind of the conversation that was going on before, and a lot of what's going to be discussed today, health and wellness is such a broad category. I think, we saw this rise in the conversation during the pandemic from just a purely mental health standpoint, and then also from a physical health standpoint. But I think sometimes in the conversation, recovery gets lost. I think people prioritize like the speakers before food, or it's great that we're seeing this huge conversation around mental health, but actually
Sure.
physical recovery doesn't seem to be, I think, as big of an area within the health and wellness space so far.
Yeah, and I think, how we look at it is, especially during the pandemic, so many people had to adjust their habits. So if you were used to taking yoga at a studio or Orange Theory or going to a gym, those habits had to shift. And so people started doing new activities, which just works your body in a different way. And I think they didn't necessarily have access to the same types of recovery modalities that they maybe hadn't already thought about bringing into their homes. And when we look at professional athletes, they are investing sort of the same amount of time into their recovery as they do into their training. And I think we as sort of everyday humans don't think about it that way. It's sort of like, oh yeah, I'm going to tack on 5 minutes at the end and, throw in a few stretches. So I think the mindset is sort of being led by the professionals, but that importance of if I want to do new things or do things that I love longer, in the sense of like into my 40s, into my 50s, 60s, like we're starting to see athletes. We have a triathlete that's in his 70s and, he attributes his recovery more than his training to that longevity.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think until you kind of get to that place where you understand the importance of it, we're all kind of in the same, I'll sneak in a run before work, and then you hop in the shower and you got 5 minutes, and then you have to jump on a call, and you're more proud that you got the workout done and you haven't really thought about recovery. So I think is it something that you guys are trying to reach where, outside of obviously from an athlete standpoint, it's so important, but then kind of the everyday consumer kind of communicating that benefit? Has that been
For
kind of a
sure. Well, I think, right, it's a little bit of two items. One is making it accessible. So for us, having a device that people can wear to work or while they're multitasking, walking the dog, etc. So I think the one thing that is consistent, whatever topic you're talking about, if you ask someone what they wish they had more of, it's time, right? And so if we can offer something that enables people to multitask, it's a little bit easier to fit it in their day versus being stuck in, a cold bath or in, recovery boots. So that's one thing, is I think having that flexibility of using the product is a way that enables people to embed it into their day more naturally. And also kind of in the collegiate world where these athletes are being asked to do so much and attending school, obviously focusing on athletics, they also are just desperate to get out of the athletic training room. And so having something that they can, again, put on and go about their day, whatever they need to do, study, grab food, is just adding, I think, to the flexibility and enabling them to use it more readily.
Mhm. And then from you brought up the collegiate athlete standpoint, so I know that we've discussed obviously in our world, once the NCAA kind of revised rules to allow athletes to take partnerships, we we're seeing this kind of change in real time. So I'd love for you to kind of talk about how that impacted what you guys were doing and kind of what the process turned to once collegiate athletes can be involved in marketing.
Sure. So I think the regulation actually went into effect on July 1st of last year, where the NC2A sort of removed the restrictions for athletes. And we were definitely watching it actively, but didn't expect the kind of dramatic shift in interest. So right away, the DMs just started stacking up from athletes across all different sports, schools we had never heard of, where we're just like overwhelmed. We really hadn't prepared with kind of a program and a criteria. And so it was very haphazard at the beginning for us. But since then, I think we have evolved a fair bit and have learned a lot. But it's been a really incredible mechanism, I think, for athletes to feel empowered to reach out to brands that they like and want to represent. It's just a much more organic opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And then I think it's interesting because, a lot of us think those high level sports, obviously football, basketball, that tend to be those huge priorities. But I think a lot of people are unaware that there are a number of different sports. Like you're mentioning, there are a number of different schools all over the country. Do you guys kind of tailor potentially messaging based on the sport or based on kind of, obviously the area might affect that as well, depending on like if you're training at altitude or things like that. Have you seen a difference between athletes that you're utilizing?
Yeah, I mean, well, as far as the type of sport that they participate in, we definitely want to have a broad array of sports represented to be able to show the breadth, so that, I think if we only focused on football and basketball, obviously those are oftentimes kind of like the money sports, right? So that there's a lot of attention there. They have bigger budgets usually and able to buy for their teams. But we see our product working well for swimmers or track and field, for soccer, volleyball. We have a skier on our NIL team, golfers. So we love to be able to show the breadth, because I think that's where a consumer might say, oh, what about me, right? Like I do pickleball, I whatever the thing is, they want to see someone kind of in their sport using the product and finding the benefit, because I think sometimes they worry that it like isn't going to transfer to them.
Mm-hmm. And then you've even kind of expanded what you're doing in that sense to also high school athletes as well, right?
Yes. So with NIL, it's very clear with the NC2A. Obviously, with high school, it's a little bit muddy because each state still has changing sort of landscape of what's permissible. We're in California, and so it's a little bit clearer here. So we've stayed somewhat local just because that's easier as far as grabbing content. But we have been fortunate to work with some runners from Newbury Park, which is just outside of LA. And we've just been completely impressed with the professionalism of these high school kids. These specifically, two of the ones we work with have a YouTube channel. They just launched their own clothing brand. There's just huge opportunities for them as well. And for us as a brand, we've seen, because we're small enough, as when we attend events, we were at the Nike Outdoor Nationals, which is a running event in Oregon, and high school athletes were going by and we could just see them saying like, oh, that's what Leo and Lex use. That's what Colin uses. Like they are recognizing where they got the information from and then showing that they have the brand awareness.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. We have that conversation, I think, a lot when brands come to us about the impact of what we can consider like a nano or a micro influencer and how highly engaged their audiences are when you're, they likely have teammates that are following them, or, when you get into college, likely, rival schools are following each other. So it's interesting to see that impact that you guys are already getting. How are you?
Well, and I would even just building on that, talk about, I was speaking with an agent from one of like the top agencies, and we were both talking about how what we see is if you have an athlete that is in lacrosse or a runner and they have 100,000 followers, 100,000 of them are probably a lacrosse player or a runner. Whereas if you have an athlete with millions of followers in football or basketball, a lot of them just love watching that player. And so from what we see in response to posts is they actually perform better with those micro kind of influencers because they're so targeted.
Mm-hmm. And I think outside of just that recognition, I think obviously from a larger brand ethos, getting high school aged kids into this practice of recovery early on is going to benefit their career, because for sports like soccer, where injuries are really high and can cut careers very early on, I think it's really beneficial to kind of get them started on that path now. Because when I was playing sports, I think it wasn't until I was in college that people start, and even like middle of college, people started talking about, oh, you should be icing or doing X, Y, and Z. And it's crazy the impact that it has.
Well, that, and I think definitely the injury front, right? If you think about it, like these athletes are being asked to do more and more, like more trainings, more stretching, more recovery, whatever it is. And the reality is there is the injury factor, but there's also just that every time I speak to an athlete and I say, your body requires 72 hours to fully recover on its own, just sleep, hydration, nutrition, those are the pieces, but it's 72 hours. That's clinically shown of what it takes your body. And none of you have 72 hours in between. And so what that means is you're probably playing in pain. And 100% of the time, the athlete nods. So to think about that, all of these athletes out there are playing in pain, playing suboptimally, right? Because if your legs are sore, you're not playing at your best. So that's where I think we've been so successful, is that what we can do is we can bring that recovery time down from 72 hours to just a day. So the next day when they go back, they do have fresh legs. And that's where I think we are getting that word of mouth buzz, because I was just talking to a quarterback at a college this morning, and he said, once I started using it, it's like everyone on my team wanted it, because I could tell them I felt better the next day. And like, it's usually not that clear to them that this specific thing is working so well for them.
Wow, that's it's amazing. I didn't even know that there was that 72-hour window where you couldn't, and it's crazy what they're being asked to do. And then, obviously that gets expanded at the professional level where,
more and
it's
more, for sure.
basically a business in and of itself to just play on that. So that, wow, that's it's interesting to hear that impact. So outside of just kind of that brand recognition, obviously the conversation you guys are getting social, are there other indicators that you're using to measure success from what you're doing, both as kind of whether you're doing brand promotion or more on the athlete influencer side?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're small enough still where we can really feel the difference. And what I mean by that is if a high level athlete does a post on their own, we're all of a sudden we're like, something happened, right? Because we can just see more visitors are going to the site, we're getting more followers, and it is converting to sales. So we're at that point where we when something really moves the needle, we can see it in those ways. So, I mean, obviously the basic metrics in social that you can see as far as shares and the comments and just the activity, but we can even see it translating to driving visitors to our site and converting into sales. And then on a sort of longer trajectory, what we do see is athletes want, there's an element where they want to be the best for themselves, but they actually recognize that if their whole team is performing at that next level, that they're going to have more success. So I've had athletes reach out to me to say, can I schedule a conversation with my coach? Because if this is helping me this much, I want to make sure my whole team has this. And it's actually led to us bringing on new teams as customers through the NIL athletes that we've been working with, which has been really cool to see.
Mm-hmm. And going back to kind of those social metrics, are you guys finding that there's like specific platforms that are just performing well? Are you kind of running, broadly across multiple platforms, and it's kind of just more dependent on, specific athletes being able to reach audiences?
I mean, some of it is, when we talk to athletes, it's like, where are you most active? What would you like to work on? So definitely we've had a lot, I would say, of early success with Instagram, and by success, sort of building a following there, but also having that translate into purchasing. Um, for us right now, TikTok feels like a very big traffic driver for us, which is awesome because it's just leading to more awareness. I think we're still trying to find that piece of like how to take the activity on TikTok into conversion, and that's something that we're still working on. And then YouTube has been really great for us as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in a lot of the partnerships that we're seeing, YouTube has kind of had that bounce back. And when I think just obviously that trend in video content and especially with something like this, being able to explain and
The educational piece, right? That's like, as a pro and a con, like we have the clinical and scientific proof for our product, which I think is missing in a lot of products where, they're able to sort of just make these lofty claims, but we actually have all this science. But the hard part about that is the educational process is longer. And so it's a little bit harder in 1 second to communicate what we are. And that's where I think on a YouTube format where they really can go through, here's what my day's like, here's how this has helped me, this is what my challenges are, and kind of weave it into their whole story as an athlete, I think it lends a different opportunity.
That definitely makes sense. And then obviously we've talked about this, the brand innovators team was talking about this as well. I think this has a connotation to be very sports focused, and obviously, leaning into athletes is very important. But then you were talking about expanding to other areas that people, may need recovery time and some other outside of the sports world. I'd love for you to kind of talk about where you think this could potentially extend to.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, one huge area is travel, whether that's for athletes, business people, or just people that are kind of going to do something. Most people find that when they arrive from travel, they don't feel well. So we are in an early partnership with a startup that is focused on making these travel kits, and we will be featured in those. So the whole travel segment for us, we were in a Sports Illustrated article where the 49ers talked about using our product for travel. So the travel sector is a big one. We've also just recently attended like a tactical conference, which is both for the military, but also we've received just some interest now from police forces and fire forces, fire departments as well. And what we're finding is whether it's the military, the fire department, when you're physically using your body again, right, and training, you're seeing it's the same factor in a different way, right? So in the military, they were initially very focused on kind of what they call it their elite teams. So like the Army Rangers or the Navy SEALs needing recovery. But now this idea that everyone really does, if you are in a physically demanding job, you do need recovery. We've just recently created an advisory board for the business and brought in some really amazing advisors. And one of them is connected with athletic trainers in the corporate world. So jobs where there's, in a factory, like physically demanding work, they have athletic trainers that support those employees. And so now being able to try to help them be able to recover and show up to work feeling better, reduce injuries, those types of things is a really exciting opportunity as well.
Do you feel like it's a little bit more challenging to kind of shift the mindset on those areas from an athlete where, I think obviously we're getting to a place where recovery is becoming more important, but do you think the messaging is obviously a little bit different, and how do you kind of change their mindset about, oh, it's just my job, I go and I do it. Do I really need to recover at the end of the day?
Yeah, I definitely, I mean, any athlete you speak to, if you talk about the importance of recovery, that's how I often start my calls, is like, I don't need to convince you of how important recovery is. That's established. Whereas 10 years ago, I think maybe we would have had to have that conversation, right? That this is important. So for us, when we initiated, we knew that there were all these different opportunities, but we started speaking directly to athletes, and specifically pro and collegiate athletes, knowing that if we didn't establish our credibility there first, we wouldn't be able to start with workers, or travelers, and then move into sports. That would have been, I think, a harder transition. but we felt that if we could really establish the importance of recovery with, or the ease of recovering with our product with athletes, that we could then extend into these other areas. So it is still early, but I will say in the conversations that we are having with the people who are charged with taking care of their employees, it is top of mind for them. So we're not having to convince them. I think we're still just figuring out how to find those people, what conferences to attend, et cetera. But it is top of mind for them, because I think the same thing is we're seeing everyone's being pushed to be efficient, whatever that means. And so in the workplace, that efficiency can sometimes have cost to the employee in how much they're being pushed to perform.
I think it's definitely a tricky mindset to change. I think I'm at the age now where I'm helping take care of grandparents and things like that. And it's interesting how, recovery and really, making the effort now, like you were mentioning, the outside of just the athlete space and wanting to potentially still be active, in your 70s or 80s, how important I think this type of trend and really pushing recovery, it could potentially help quality of life, down the road for a lot of us 30, 40 years from now.
Absolutely. And I think the concept, and just because we haven't really chatted about it, is just with our product, what we do is we increase circulation so that basically your body is really healing itself, because that we are made to heal ourselves. It's just, that was my point, is it does take 72 hours to just kind of go through that process. But if we can accelerate that process and become a part of just your day-to-day, that when you travel or when you push your body, you are going to take that time to just put yourself back together. I think it is true. You will find that, we see kind of growth in all of these activities, whether it's, pickleball or triathletes. Those upper age brackets continue to grow because more and more athletes are focusing on their wellness through, just hydration, nutrition, sleep, but also then adding in these other things like yoga or recovery, and finding ways to extend their ability to do the things that they love.
And I love that multitasking aspect. I was just thinking, oh, this would be great. I could, be drafting emails and doing it at the same time. And it's really something I think that can help. And especially even at the collegiate level, when you're trying to, study, or you're just sitting in your dorm room, you could be, in theory, recovering at the same time. That's a great aspect to it.
For sure. And I think, for us, so many of us think about these like sort of elite athletes with huge contracts in the NFL or MLB, NBA, but there's so many athletes in other sports leagues that don't necessarily have these huge contracts, and they also have jobs on top of what they're doing. So again, that need, it's like they're waking up super early to get that run or training session in, and then they come back to a desk job where they're working. And so being able to sit there, to your point, and do your emails while wearing our device, and then be able to go to their evening workout feeling fresh, is a real opportunity for them.
And then kind of, obviously I think expanding on the conversation before ours, like I was mentioning, I think there's so much that goes into recovery as well, outside of physical recovery. A lot of times that goes hand in hand with what you're eating nutrition wise. It could also be mental health. I know for a lot of collegiate athletes, these are huge, feats that they're taking on. If you're like the starting quarterback of an SEC team, that's a huge burden to be on. Have you guys explored, I know you were talking about travel and potentially integrating with other startups. Have you thought about potentially partnering with other, it seems like in the health and wellness space, there's a lot of wanting to partner together to kind of create holistic health options. Have you guys considered potentially partnering with other recovery products to kind of expand on that process of recovery?
We definitely have done some partnerships, whether it's with protein drinks, or we just recently did one with a kind of company that had socks that helped, avoid, athletic socks that again help avoid feet injury, etc., through fit. And so it's something we're very open to. I mean, to your earlier point, yes, the quarterback in the SEC is under a ton of pressure, but these athletes, it's so competitive to just get to that D1 sport, whatever the sport is. And so these athletes are feeling under tremendous pressure to perform on the field, perform in school. So, I just want to acknowledge that it is something, and we would love to continue to partner with other brands in our space. We're actually just working right now with our social media manager to identify some more local in the LA area to do some local events. So that is something we're talking about right now. We also are just trying to get to, the word out as broadly as possible, again, because I think if we can get athletes out of the training room so that they can go on with their day, like just getting back, that will alleviate some of the stress. But as far as finding, other partners, it's something we're definitely open to. And I think as we progress, we'll continue to find those partners that are focused in the same way as us in the space.
It's amazing to see, I think, how many options there are from, unfortunately, it kind of seems like I wasn't in college that long ago, but it has been a bit of time now. But it's amazing to see, I think, in that period of time, you really only had your trainer from your team, and, you iced or did whatever, and then that was kind of it. So it's really amazing, I think, to see growth wise. And obviously, the pandemic has kind of expanded, obviously timelines on what people are considering for health and wellness, but it's just amazing to see all these options that exist now for these athletes.
For sure. And kids are staying, there's like this interesting thing happening in the education world, right? Because for younger kids, I think they really have lost time because of the pandemic in the classroom, et cetera. But on the sports side, these athletes are being extended. And so many of them are getting masters right now. So I feel like we're going down this very well-educated kind of athlete population, which is a really neat opportunity for them, which is a little bit of a different thing. I think everyone's so focused, which we need to be on, kind of the loss in learning, but there is this little segment that I think are actually benefiting because they're getting additional years of eligibility, and the way to do that is just to stay in school and now pursue a master's, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't even think of it that way, because I think you're right. Everybody globbed onto, oh no, this is like your freshman year and it's 2020 and you're, being thrown into this, and everyone was just trying to figure out how do we practice? How do we practice safely?
For
Because
sure.
a lot of the sports are obviously extremely close contact. So there were a lot of issues there, but that's definitely, I think, a very interesting point in allowing, the additional eligibility and the longer time to kind of grow as an athlete.
Yeah.
So obviously, in kind of taking over this role, you've been running a number of initiatives. Has there been any specific campaign or kind of focus that you've done that you've been particularly proud of?
Yeah, we have had the opportunity to work with some really high level athletes that have, just because they love the product and want to continue to receive, do product partnerships, have worked with us. So there's a group of runners called Tin Man Elite that we've worked with them to make some really incredible YouTube content. They're doing a European series right now that we're going to work with them on. And so finding some of those longer term partnerships, we'll do a one-off, like, great, we'll send you some product and they'll do a post. But when we have the opportunity, whether it's with these high school runners or some of the collegiate athletes that we work with, where we can create these longer term partnerships that over time they can really tell how the product has helped them, right? Like, I think sometimes when you're doing a one-off, it's a little bit early, like they've used it, they feel good the next day, they're able to speak to that and it is authentic. And but when we can develop these longer term partnerships because they truly love the product, that's something that makes us really proud that they show up over and over. And the same thing with some of the collegiate teams that we're working with, in how they've wanted to work with us to communicate the benefits within their own universities, like being advocates for us within the university and extending us to other teams or even across to other universities. That word of mouth has been something that has been just a huge game changer for us, that has evolved from these long-term partnerships.
I think there's two really interesting points you brought up. And I think, we've had this conversation a lot, and at Influential, we've tried to stress this, that having that authenticity and having somebody that is promoting a product that truly believes in that product is just so important, and it really extends. And it seems like, you know, for you guys, that it's really working well because it's extending through team members or through conferences or whatnot. So it's so important to really be able to tap into people that truly believe in products.
100%. And I see that just in the calls with the athletes when they say, well, what do you want us to say? And I tell them, I want you to talk about your experience, like just share how it's helping you. And we feel comfortable. Like, I don't have to put the words in your mouth. And I know you've worked with, and I've worked with brands where we have to be so careful because we either, you know, it's being so tightly controlled, or we're concerned that they're going to go off into a direction that maybe is uncomfortable for the brand. It's been really freeing to be able to work in this way, to really have them express their authentic experience and not have to sort of rein it in. And I think because of that, it's being accepted more readily.
Mm-hmm. And then additionally, I think, you know, even in the influencers that I follow on social, regardless of whether they're, you know, doing specific posts where they're talking about the product, even just having, you know, if they were having the product on while they're watching TV and they're doing stories or something and talking about their day, audiences really key into what they're using and what they're posting about. You know, when I'm looking at influencers, I know even though they're not doing promoted products, I know that they like X brand of coffee, you know, because I see their content all the time. It's amazing how much that not only, you know, association with the brand over a longer period of time, but even just that subconscious seeing it in their content really seems to work well.
I think that's true, definitely. And I think that's maybe to the point earlier of like that YouTube concept in, you know, if we're doing an Instagram or someone's doing, you know, a TikTok, it tends to be obviously much shorter content. And so it's like, get to the point, make sure you focus, etc. So it does feel very brand forward sometimes. Whereas in a YouTube where you could have a video for 20 minutes where the brand has just a few seconds, it definitely shifts that branding for a sense because it doesn't feel over branded. It feels very authentic and organic.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, you brought up that point about influencers being like, I don't, you know, where's the brand? We've been so much control. I think it's so funny that we've gotten to a place where a lot of brands tend to be, and obviously for some, legal does play a factor in wanting to, you know, script out messaging and things like that. But I think it's when brands can be a little bit more free with messaging and allow athletes or influencers, whoever, to be able to use the product and really talk about it authentically. It seems to have, I think, even sometimes a stronger impact than, you know, that overly, you know, brand focused holding product type content that we, you know, I think sometimes people tend to shy away from on social.
I think that's true because it, you know, just feels less of an ad.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's sort of like I'm sharing this experience with you versus I'm shoving this at you. And I think that we all see so much that that's sort of a way I think our mind organizes like that content.
Have you seen like a specific type of, I know obviously we were talking about money sports and that the majority of large institutions tend to put focus on football and basketball as kind of the main drivers. Have you seen that there's been a huge popularity with other sports outside of that? Is it running or things like that where it's a little bit heavier impact? Or have you seen things, you know, obviously for people that may not be familiar with collegiate sports, they even have equestrian and a number of other sports outside of that we may not, you know, automatically associate with being an athlete. But are there other areas you think that have kind of had a huge impact with this?
I mean, for us, definitely in the running world, so track and field and cross country, those kids are running, especially in the cross country season, just a crazy amount of mileage and putting just a ton of their body is just being put through the works. So for us, that's where we started to work with some of these earlier kind of elite teams, like Tin Man Elite, etc. And that filtered down to where colleges that, you know, in the NAIA, like not the big D1 teams, started reaching out, and we literally were just blown away that schools we weren't really on our radar to reach out to because we just don't have that manpower were proactively reaching to us. And those are schools that don't necessarily have a football team because obviously it takes a huge budget to support a team of that size. But, anyone can sort of have a running team. And so we do see a huge amount of interest in that community for sure in the product. But then beyond that, it tends to go like, as we see orders come in, it'll be a golf team and then a soccer team and a volleyball team and a softball team. And it's actually really fun to just see how many different sports see that benefit. I think it could go even wider, to your point that there are, crew and water polo and sports that we honestly haven't had an opportunity to focus on yet, but still see out there that we would be beneficial for. It just is a matter of focus right now.
And I think it really plays off to your point where you're saying that, one person may try it and it works well and it spreads. A lot of those, I don't necessarily want to call them smaller sports, but some of the sports that don't have as much attention, like I played water polo in college, it's a very, very small community. So when things start to work well for one team, it starts spilling over, a lot of teams, and there's a lot of opportunity for that word of mouth to really take off in some of those areas.
And we honestly feel that the faster you put our product on after working out, the better, because the longer the lactic acid sits in your muscles, et cetera, the worse. So we encourage people to put it on. So what we were finding in the track and field community is athletes were putting it on and then going up to the podium wearing our product. And all of a sudden it's like, wait, what, all those winners, what are they doing? And that actually was something that created a lot of awareness for us.
Yeah, that's an interesting, I think cycling has the, the same thing where a lot of times those poor people are writing these like 100-mile races, and then they're like, okay, go stand up here now. And you're like, oh God, how? And they're trying to drink things and take recovery as quickly as possible to rate, a lot of times, like it's really important to do that, as soon as you're done.
Absolutely. And we, because when you're seated, so like if you think about being on a bus or a plane, you actually are decreasing your circulation, which is why a lot of times when you get off the plane, your feet are, your shoes don't fit anymore or whatever happens, right? That's because you're not getting circulation. So we would have teams like finish a soccer match and they were about to get back on the bus and they were sitting on the field putting the product on. And it's the same thing. The team that just lost to them notes that and they get it, and we'll have someone reach out and say, oh, we were just beat by this team, and then we saw them all put on Firefly and get on the bus, so that's like, for us, we couldn't script it better, than something like that happening.
And then one thing that I always like to end with, I think it's absolutely crazy that we just had Labor Day and we're in September now and it's almost the end of the year. What's one thing that you're looking forward to in these last few months of the year from a professional standpoint and also just from a personal standpoint?
Sure. Professionally, we're just closing this month our Series A. So it's our first fundraising, and it's going to open the opportunity for us to really expand our marketing. So getting my hands on a bigger budget and really being able to leverage that to increase brand awareness is something I'm super excited about. So that will be a big impact for us in the remaining part of the year. Personally, I have very mixed feelings about this, but I'm about to become an empty nester. So I'm taking my youngest to school this weekend. And so it's like a definite new chapter, and it's a really good time professionally to have that shift. But at the same time, I'm really struggling with just exactly how I feel about it.
Oh, you guys, that was fantastic from the personal and the professional perspectives. Thank you so much for sharing, Lauren and Courtney. Now, I know that Lauren said that Firefly helps take your recovery down from 72 hours to about 24 hours. Does that apply to like swing dancing too?
We actually have had a number of dancers, both Broadway dancers and professional dancers from ballet to ballroom, reach out to us about how the product has helped them. Wow. So again, I should have added that into the conversation with Courtney. It's like a whole other area because—
Well, I just did for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Dancers, both of my daughters danced, and I know how much they put their bodies through as well. And so another area that really need recovery.
Excellent. I'll be shopping online perhaps. So again, thank you both, Lauren and Courtney, Firefly and Firefly Recovery and Influential.
Thank you.